introduce the speaker for the final keynote speech. The speech is titled, Countering Colonialism for Sustainability, Creativity and Ethics in English Language Education in Bangladesh. Our distinguished keynote speaker is Professor Dr. Shaila Sultana. Professor Sultana is the Director and Professor of the BRAC Institute of Language. She served as professor and former head of the Department of English Language, Institute of Modern Languages at the University of Dhaka. Dr. Sultana has made significant contributions to the field of applied linguistics and sociolinguistics. Her research focuses on trans approaches to language and identity, sociology, critical geography, and the historical and socio-cultural significance of English in post-colonial countries. She has authored articles in renowned international applied linguistics journals and co-authored books that explore popular culture, voice, and linguistic diversity. Her work is pioneering in the field, and we are privileged to hear her insight. May I also welcome our session chair, Professor A.M.M. Hamidur Rahman, professor in the Department of English at Daffodil International University. Sir, your presence is greatly appreciated. Can I request our esteemed guests to please come to the stage? Professor Hamidur Rahman and Dr. Shaila Sultana. Please welcome them with a round of applause. Thank you, Dr. Sultana and Professor Hamidur Rahman. Sir, I would request you to begin the session and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Shaila Sultana doesn't need any introduction. You've already heard about her. My longtime colleague and a great teacher and researcher in the field of English language teaching. So let's listen to her presentation, Countering Colonialism for Sustainability, and let's enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Conference committee for inviting me and creating this platform where I can talk about something very close to my heart. And specifically, I would like to thank Asif for inviting me and bringing me here so that I can see all the beautiful faces of my colleagues, former students, researchers who are, in fact, sharing the same trajectory of a researcher, of an academic here in Bangladesh. So thank you so much, Asif. You know about the topic, right? Countering colonialism is quite a heavy word for sustainability, ethics, and creativity in English language education. And through the process of my presentation today, we'll try to understand this notion of colonialism and how this notion, in fact, creates certain epistemic dependency, which, in fact, makes the English language education worldwide and in Bangladesh as well, sort of lifeless in the sense that it is no longer sustainable. We don't see ethical practices in English language education, and we also see that there is a lack of creativity because of this epistemic dependence. I will also suggest through the presentation that perhaps it is high time we explore the Southern theories, the ideas, the intelligence, the academic rigor of the academics, of Global South, of our country, and understand how we can take help of their understanding of their insights to improve the English language education industry in Bangladesh. And I will also show that, through countering
Recording in
colonial
progress.
lingualism, perhaps we can reimagine English language education in Bangladesh. So what is this colonial lingualism? In fact, it is the ongoing reproduction of colonial legacies. And how is it done? It is done through admiration, through sort of acceptance, direct acceptance of all the theories and practices from the colonial era, and then keep on practicing them, specifically in relation to language and culture, and specifically in relation to the knowledge that we get from the colonial period and the so-called colonizers from the West. And we do it through lots of admiration, with lots of respect. And consequently, what happens is this. We do not see that perhaps the legacies of colonial era or the colonizers that we find in curriculum, that we find in textbooks, that we find in syllabus, perhaps they're not perfectly appropriate for our context. And sometimes we find that these elements, curriculum, syllabus, textbooks, teaching approaches and methods that we receive from the West, from the global North, from the colonizers, they're perhaps not appropriate for the contextual realities of global South. And that is why, Megan, who is the initiator of this notion of colonial lingualism, he states that this dependency, the entire slavish dependency on the global North does not allow, effective teaching and learning of English in global South. And in many occasions, we find that, in fact, these elements that we receive from the global North, they are subtractive, and in many occasions, they silence the voices of indigenous communities or the local academics. And we also see that, sometimes as they're not appropriate for the teaching and learning environment of Bangladesh or countries in global South, we see that the objectives of teaching and learning are not fulfilled. So in summary, colonial lingualism, in fact, shows white epistemological supremacy. And because of our acceptance of epistemological supremacy, in many occasions, we see that we become a product of linguistic and cognitive imperialism. We do not see the negative sides of the curriculum or the syllabuses that we get from the global North. And this epistemic dependency at the same time, in fact, decenter the indigenous scholars or the academics in the global South, and we see the lots of silencing of the voices. So what is this epistemic dependency? This epistemic dependency, in fact, refers to the acceptance of knowledge, any framework, from any resources without any critical thinking. And since we accept the framework without any critical thinking, in many occasions we see that they directly impact on the practices which are not congruous with the local context. And that is why it is said that epistemological dependency refers to the condition in which our knowledge construction and validation are shaped by the information sources we choose. And how does it happen? It happens because we can collect the knowledge from different sources. For example, it can be research, it can be social media, it can be traditional ecological knowledge, it can be public discourse or industry standard and practices. But if we take our knowledge from one single source without much critical engagement, what we see that we get sort of influenced by the assumptions and biases, and we do not recognize the limitations of the knowledge that we're receiving. So when we receive the knowledge, what happens as a result, we oversimplify the complex issues, and we do not think about the ecological factors in our context. We do not consider the alternative approaches that we can take for English language teaching and learning, because we have already accepted that English language teaching curriculum, syllabus, and approaches and methods that we receive from the West are the best. So we do not look for any alternative ways or approaches for these elements. We also see that, since we receive this knowledge from the global North without much critical engagement, without much choice in some cases, the power relationship remains static. There is a reinforcement of existing power relationship that we observe between global South and global North. And ultimately what happens is this: again, the local voices are marginalized. So in summary, we see that because of the epistemic dependence of the global South on the global North, there is a contextual blindness that in fact impact the teaching and learning in a local context. For example, when we think about the research studies done in America and think that specific method is very much appropriate for my context, in fact, I have contextual blindness. I don't see that, all right, okay, perhaps this approach and method is appropriate for an American school. Is it appropriate for a school in Bangladesh? We do not ask this question. And there is a tendency of reductionist, reduction. For example, there are different types of variables in English teaching and learning. For example, we can talk about the structural resources. We can talk about the socio-economic condition. We can also talk about geographical location, gender, age. All these factors, in fact, influence language teaching and learning. But when we, again, blindly bring certain approaches and methods to our context, we do not see that how these various variables, in fact, impact this language teaching and learning. So we are reducing all the variables to accommodate the perfect variables that are shown in the research practices, in the research results of the global North. And there is always, underlying values that we do not see. Knowledge is never neutral. Knowledge is always value-laden. We don't see that. And as a result, if that society is very much driven by neoliberal or capitalist ethos, we, with that acceptance of the form of knowledge, we abide by those ethos. So these value-laden assumptions, in fact, for example, as I said, prioritization of economic growth or technological solutions, they're perhaps not appropriate for my context. Perhaps amar deshe, it is more important to have a harmonious condition that we had centuries ago that we see in Guru Shishyo. Perhaps it was not our social norm to always go for better job, a high-paid salary. Perhaps historically, our human relationships are more important. But with those foreign elements, we start accepting this new kind of values associated with capitalism and neoliberalism. So we see that there is a lots of limitations when we start depending on specific knowledge sent to us, provided to us, bestowed on us, and sometimes forced on us by the global North. So there are plenty of examples of epistemic dependence and colonial lingualism in our context. In general, if you think about the language studies, we see that we have lots of respect for the Anglo-Saxons and the variety of Englishes that the Anglo-Saxons use. American English, British English. Think about the many hours that we spend, many courses students take, only to fix their pronunciation. Because of this reverence, we forget about the communication factors. We become more obsessed with the accuracy and fluency that we see in the Anglo-Saxons. And we do not pay any respect to the local varieties of Englishes. Paper kagoje kolome bola hai, all right, okay, world Englishes. We should be, including world Englishes in our discourses, in our classroom practices. But in reality, when we are in an interview board, when we are talking to, candidates, we are aware of all these issues, but we right away reject a candidate if the candidate fails to say parliament or zero or zero. So all the knowledge that we have about this equal rights and world varieties, they go right away out of the door because we are obsessed with the native variety of English. We also see that there is a lots of obsession with the way language is defined. And that is why, as language teachers, we start correcting subject-verb agreements so much so that we forget the creativity of our students. Sometimes we become so obsessed with this logocentrism and also with the variety of the Anglo-Saxons, we forget to question why certain students do not write certain way, because we have already set a standard. Those who do not, those whose writing do not match that standard, we just consider them as an outsider, not an insider. We also see that, in the knowledge activism, I don't think that any of you have found any famous journal papers where you saw the reference or written by famous applied linguists or social linguists. You won't find many reference to South Asia or scholars from the South Asia. So it shows that even in knowledge activism, we are way behind. Because in knowledge activism, the global north is always ahead. And we also see that these discussions, these sort of radical discussions, where we talk about the empowerment of the academics and researchers of global south, it happens in a forum like this, where I'm a researcher, an academic, I talk to you, you are an academic and researcher, you listen. So these things remain a part of the discussions in the academia. They do not have any practical impact as such. And we also see that, these things have remained the same because of the economic dependence of the global south on the global north. And there is also a lot of politics, power politics, that is going on in the name of globalization and internationalization. Excuse my pronunciation once in a while. Jokhoni ekta shabdo tinta syllable cross kore, I start stammering. So you see that because of globalization and internationalization, we really can't forget about the significance of the standard variety of English and the significance of English for getting better jobs. And in practice, the communicative language teaching, for example, it was imposed on us in 1980s. And Sir can also support it. It was suggested by British Council, right, sir? And we have seen so many research articles. Ekhono amar chhatrora communicative language teaching er efficacy niye research thesis likhte chai. So much love for communicative language teaching, because communicative language teaching is considered to be the panacea or the medicine of all the linguistic problems. But in reality, we see that students across Bangladesh, teachers across Bangladesh, are suffering a lot because of the existence of communicative language teaching. And recently, you know about the competency-based curriculum, right? CBC. It's a perfect curriculum. It's really perfect, but is it perfect for Bangladesh? We have to question it. It's a finished curriculum. আর কে জানে না যে মুরগি খাওয়া ভালো শরীরের জন্য রে ভাই, প্রোটিন তো ভালো শরীরের জন্য, আমরা সবাই জানি। কিন্তু এই প্রোটিনটা আমার শরীরের কোনো জন্য ভালো কি না সেটা বুঝবো কিভাবে, রাইট? সো সেম থিং হ্যাপেন্ড উইথ সিবিসি. CBSE is really a good curriculum, but what happened in Bangladesh when it was introduced? Teachers did not have the appropriate training to use CBC. We also see that parents were unprepared, students were unprepared. The infrastructure did not have the resources necessary for CBC. And ultimately we see that it was thrown away after a few months or 1 year, right? And similarly, we see that different government and non-government organizations are also playing very key role in bringing in different approaches, methods, and curriculum to Bangladesh. UNDP, UNICEF, British Council, they also have vested interest in introducing different curriculum syllabuses and approaches and methods. But we see that because of this imported pedagogy, Western-centric approach, and donor-driven policies, all this curriculum, all these approaches and methods fail. And eventually, it creates more and more and more inequalities amongst different communities, different students, and different teachers. Now, should we throw away English? Can we throw it away? Our bread and butter, আমাদের কারোই চাকরি থাকবে না, বেতন আসবে কোথা থেকে, right? That is a practical aspect. And this is the source of bread and butter for many of us. But at the same time, why would we throw it away? Because this language has been with us hundreds and hundreds of years. But what we need to do is to dethrone it. We have given way too much importance to it. So we have to dethrone English from its position of supremacy. And we have to bring it to the earth. Make it a language like any other languages, like Bangla or Noakhali Bangla or Sylheti Bangla. Sylheti Bangla is a bit more prestigious compared to Noakhali and Bangla. We can have another discourses about this. And we also can, in fact, see how we can redefine English as a tool among many. And we can look into this factor, how we can use this strategically as a tool to access the global resources, but always in local terms. And we also have to consider how we can bring back the intellectual traditions of the global South to the fore. Rather than depending on the global North always, can we think about how we can bring the voices of the teachers, of the academics, of the scholars from the global South? So that is the question that I have to you. What way can we do that? In our book, Language and Sustainability, Sustainable Development in Bangladesh, we have developed this framework where where we have identified the elements that can make language and language education sustainable. And if you look into these different elements, you will see that accessibility, then quality, equality, these are very important for making language education sustainable. But the practices that we have at the moment in English language education, is it accessible to everyone? Is it equitable? Are we having a system in our education, language education, where we have social justice and equity? No, we do not have it. Look at the results that we saw a few months ago, the HSC results. The majority of the students failed in English. So it shows that the program, English language program, the English language education that we have in Bangladesh is not sustainable, definitely not. Now, a disclaimer, because now I'll be talking about certain ways of looking into this matter. I'm showing this disclaimer because in a politically volatile country like Bangladesh, everything is politicized. So the names that I'll be showing, I don't want you to think that I have certain promotional factor here or preferences. It's only that I know about their work and I will be referring to their work. But you can consider any scholar, any activist that you know here, from Bangladesh or from South Asia. And you can raise these questions that I'll be showing you and think how we can appropriate their ideas, their activism in our English language education in Bangladesh. So first, I'll be talking about Rabindranath Tagore. Everybody knows him, right? He's a Bengali poet, he's a novelist, he's an actor, playwright, painter, and he's more famous than ever for his songs, and then for his, for what? কিসের জন্য? কিসের জন্য রবীন্দ্রনাথ বিখ্যাত? First non-European and first Asian to win the Nobel Prize. But most of us do not talk about his own school, college, and university. He established this school, college, and university from the belief that students learn better when they are nurtured within nature. Based on his philosophy, he in fact developed a universal, contextually appropriate education system to advance human minds. And we can also talk about Gandhi. He came up with this new kind of education philosophy, Nayeem. So we know him as the father of Indian nation. We also know that he led the anti-colonial movement in India. But how many of us know that he initiated a new kind of education system based on the philosophy of non-violence? আপনারা জানেন? আমি জানতাম না। So when I studied, I found that, his basic education, in fact, promoted the reinforcement of basic skills to nurture individual and collective rights and well-being in a sustainable society. He also believes in the promotion of socially responsible teaching and learning. So teachers and students, they engage together in experiential and reflective learning. And this process, in fact, developed human personality as a whole. Another activist who is very close to my heart, my students perhaps who are here, they know, I always talk about The Pedagogy of Oppressed by Paulo Freire. There is another book that he has written, Pedagogy of Freedom. And here we know that this Brazilian educator and social activist, he in fact talked about an education system where education has the purpose of emancipation. Education is needed at the grassroots level for the marginalized communities for establishing the egalitarian democracy. He also talks about this widely acceptable understanding of education that is communitarian education. And he called it, so it's a Escola Cidadã, citizen schools, and which is considered to be one of the most significant educational innovation from Latin America. So what is this, citizen schools? We will talk about it a bit later. But if you think about all these three, what would I say? They are not academics, right? There's non-formal academics, perhaps. That could be a good term for them. And then Paulo Freire was an activist All right, all of them had different life trajectories in different times and different spaces. Their vocations were different as well. One was a poet, one was a lawyer, and then another one, and he was also a politician. Gandhi was a politician. And then we also have Freire, who was an activist. And what is the similarity that they have? All of them were located in the periphery of global economy. And all of them raise concerns about the collective supremacy given to the colonizer. And they also, worked hard. They sacrificed their life in order to conceptualize education in the global South. And they also showed keen awareness about the colonialism, the after effect, the negative effect of colonialism, and how the imposed educational philosophy from the colonizers crippled the minds, young minds of learners. And they also were respectful. They didn't say that, all right, okay, we have to throw away English or we have to throw away Western education. They were very respectful to the Western knowledge, Western philosophy, Western languages. But they were mindful about the local culture, the local languages. So they believed that education system, needs to be based on, local theories. But at the same time, with these local references, students will be able to have their freedom of thought. They will have critical engagement with the content that they're studying. They will be more creative. And all of these three people, they have talked about emotion, love, compassion, and free environment. And most notably, we have to consider that these three people, they were organic intellectuals, and that is why they knew how learning and teaching should be. And they understood that, through colonized processes, an appropriate teaching and learning can never happen. But interestingly enough, even in Brazil, and Paulo Freire's literacy theory, in fact, has inspired thousands and thousands of people across the world. Many nations, in fact, has borrowed the literacy model from Paulo Freire. But what is happening in Brazil? Brazil itself, in many occasions, depends on foreign theories. তাহলে বোঝেন কি অবস্থা আমাদের, we are so enslaved by the idea of the supremacy of knowledge coming from the global South, we do not see what jewels, what gems are here in our own context. And I think we can have a bit of food for thoughts based on this discussion. So how will sustainability look like according to Rabindranath Tagore? In fact, according to Rabindranath Tagore, perhaps the use of the mother tongue and having a plurilingual approach, looking at and considering the needs of different learners within the system, can be a way of ensuring a sustainable teaching and learning. And he also believed in the presence of different linguistic languages and multimodal way of teaching and learning. And that is why he said, Yatra Visbam Vavatika Nidam, where the whole world mates in a single nest. And this idea, in fact, highlights his view that English was of many languages. It was never superior. And even for Gandhi, in fact, he was an avid learner of different languages. He learned and mastered Sanskrit, English, French, Latin, Hindi, Arabic, Persian, Urdu, and even he studied Tamil and Telugu. So when we learn so many languages in one go, we will perhaps give a bit less emphasis on the English language. The English language becomes one of many languages. And how can we improve ethics when we consider all these intellectuals, organic intellectuals? For example, Freire came up with this idea of conscientization. And what is this conscientization? This refers to the challenges, the social, political, and economic oppression that people experience in day-to-day life. And he, in fact, in his specific schooling system, he created that environment, the right kind of environment where students were considering all these issues, this oppression. And consequently, what happens is that they became the spokesperson of mitigating all the oppressions. If you think about the English education in this subcontinent, we also see that, we can consider the ethos of Gandhi. And what are these ethos? These ethos are Swaraj. These ethos are, Satyagraha, and then Sarvodaya, and we also can talk about Dharma. Dharma mane dharma na, this is duty to the humans and other animals. So if we can consider this, how we can in fact create an ethical practice, we can create, let's give an example of that. For example, the concept of dharma can be used to reframe the classroom interaction, where learning and taking care of others is a collective responsibility. Structuring some task where students are explicitly asked to ensure everyone in their group to understand a concept, that can be a good demonstration of dharma. And we can also see that, if we can engage students in project-based learning, where students will have to identify certain problems in their community, and they have to come up with their own solutions based on the materials and resources they have. We can, on the one hand, ensure creativity. Also, at the other hand, we will be able to ensure ethics. So now you can say that, all right, okay, আমরা তো এগুলো করি ক্লাসে, আমরা তো প্রজেক্ট বেস ক্লাস করাই, এটা গান্ধী এমন কি বলে গেছে যেটা আমাদের শুনতে হবে। কিন্তু সমস্যাটা হয়েছে যে গান্ধীর কথা পড়ে কিন্তু আমরা এটা শিখি নাই, আমরা শিখেছি হচ্ছে টাস্ক বেস অ্যাপ্রোচ থেকে, which was again রড এলিস এতগুলো বই লিখেছে, সেই বইগুলো পড়েই আমরা শিখেছি, রাইট? So interestingly enough, all this philosophy that we accept from the global north now, in terms of task-based approach or cooperative learning, they were all mentioned hundreds years ago by these organic intellectuals. So rather than, going through these processes of appropriating theories from the global north, why not going back to our organic intellectual in global south? এত ঘুরায় খাওয়ার তো দরকার নাই আমার, তাই না? আমাদের লোকজনই যদি বলতে পারে, তারা আরও বলেছে, বিকজ তাদের করাটা, ফলো করাটা বেটার ইন দ্য সেন্স দ্যাট they have practiced them in their local context, which are similar to ours. So whatever challenges they face, these challenges exist for us, and they have identified processes of mitigating these challenges. So perhaps we will be better if you find out the practices they did, and we will be able to identify more effective solutions for the problems. And I'm almost at the end. And most importantly, we need a bit of Maya. Maya is a South Asian contextual notion, Maya, you know that. And this is a similar notion, Ubuntu. We need that in our everyday life, because the worlds of English and Englishlessness, when they collide, they become catastrophic for students. And in many occasions, we do not hear this silencing of our students. We become, again, so much engrossed in approach methods and assessment. And we do not have time to consider those English-less students who come from peripheral communities to the classroom. So we need a bit of Ubuntu. No matter how much we talk about theories and practices from the global south, without Ubuntu, without a bit of passion, without a bit of compassion, love, affection, we won't be able to decolonize the entire structure of teaching and learning. So let's conclude. It is sort of a concept paper. It is your homework to find out your vocation, your global South scholar, your vocation to identify what will work for your context. But I think it is the food for thought that I have wanted to give to you. And perhaps this last section I will want to read so that you can, should I turn it off? You can follow me better. Yeah. Thank you. All right. With reference to Rabindranath Tagore's educational philosophy, Mahatma Gandhi's Swaraj, self-rule, and Paulo Freire's notion of critical pedagogy, the presentation has highlighted the need for critical awareness about inclusive education, geopolitical inequalities, class, poverty, and colonization. Such Southern philosophies foreground ways of pursuing social justice and equity in English language education in Bangladesh. And most importantly, if we follow the philosophy of the global South scholars, we will be able to decolonize our research imagination and free ourselves from colonial and epistemic bondage. In addition, the voices of resistance can be better understood when we examine the local realities through the theories developed by the scholars from the global South. Above all, minimizing intellectual dependency on Northern theories is momentous for gaining the intellectual sovereignty of the South. The recognition of voices from the global South only may initiate a much-needed constructive conversation for decolonization and de-eliticization of English in Bangladesh. Tagore initiated a new understanding of education based on the philosophy of nature and nurture. Gandhi, through his philosophy based on Swaraj, Sarvodaya, and Satyagraha, and they became a powerful tool to fight against colonial legacies mentioned in my presentation. So we need certain autonomy, intellectual sovereignty, and we also need critical awareness of Freire. And through his philosophy of conscientization, liberation, and humanization, we will be able to find the hope of freedom. Freire identified the role of interaction, dialogue, and action for effective learning and teaching. And central to all these three traditions is the promotion of the mother tongue as the foundation of education. Gandhi also emphasized the significance of responsibility and voices. He also talked about how we can talk about the human rights. And human rights and justice were not individual. It is collective entitlements. And we can ensure that if we look into the individual and collective duties as teachers, as learners, It is more appropriate for the Bangladeshi society as a community is based on dharma, religion. We are a duty-based society. We have forgotten about it, because of all these impositions from the global north. But our societies, our religion is, our spirituality is based on dharma. So perhaps it is time we go back to this original ethos that we have. And we also have to consider that, colonial lingualism articulated today through new liberalized and internationally packaged models of education can be minimized and destabilized by drawing on these philosophies. And English education that remains tethered to northern theories while divorced from southern realities will always fail to do justice to students. By contrast, reclaiming the South's intellectual tradition can transform the English as a tool of perpetuating oppression. Perhaps it can become a tool of emancipation. So it is time to ensure the epistemological and the intellectual sovereignty of the global South. And this will allow us to redefine and reimagine the English language education in Bangladesh. So with this, I finish my presentation. And as I said, this is sort of a concept that I have been working recently. I hope you find it helpful some way to think about English language education. This is coming out soon. Perhaps if you're interested to read the entire chapter, you can email me, and in a few months I'll be able to share it. And in fact, this chapter is coming in the handbook, edited by Paul Megan, who has given birth to this idea of colonial lingualism. And today's presentation, I would like to thank my teacher, Fahmida. I had 3 teachers in my school who, sort of encouraged me, motivated me to take English literature as a pursuit, and Shaila Ahmed is one of them. I take this opportunity.
Can I request her to come on the stage, please? Yeah, thank you, Professor Shaila Sultana, for a very thoughtful and scholarly presentation. Do you have a time for 1 or 2 questions? Do you have?
Maybe 1 or 2 questions.
Okay, right. Are there any questions that somebody has raised his hand here?
I know that it was theoretically heavy, but the purpose was like that. Keynote should be like that, I feel.
Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. With due respect, and I just want to just get a bit more insight into the area that, as you are focusing on the global south rather than the global north, as an attempt to perhaps emancipate our epistemological or the intellectual
Dependency.
faculty from them, dependency. So my question is, why not rather be focused, make it more, narrower, why not just focus on our area only, rather than those Latin American or elsewhere? Why don't we just follow our own scholars sprouting here, in Bangladesh?
That's the
question.
point I also mentioned. I'm aware of their work, and that's why I have referred to their work. And I have also told you that, we can select any scholar from our context and see how we can share their ideas in order to improve the education system in Bangladesh. But again, as Rabindranath has said, this entire world is one world, right? We have nest with various worlds within it. So why not referring to other activists who are suffering just like us? Global South countries in different parts of the world, even though we don't want to generalize, but we have the same kind of suffering. We have the same kind of economic struggle. We have the same kind of marginalization in the dynamic of Global South and Global North. And that is why I do not see any harm in understanding their struggle. Perhaps through their struggle, we will be able to understand our struggle as well. So whatever way we find a durable way of reimagining our education system, it should be fine. But the bottom line is we should be starting considering our local context and local scholars, the organic intellectuals first, rather than depending on Global North, British Council, American Cultural Center, and UNICEF, because this new syllabus was brought by UNICEF, if you know. So we should be considering more of our context. Yes.
Thank you. I don't think we can take any more questions.
But we can have conversation during the coffee break.
Just to conclude.
Yeah.
Just to conclude, it's a very scholarly and thoughtful presentation.
Bless you. God
And
bless you.
this thing has been debate about this colonialism has been going on for a long time. And Shaila was a student of Professor Alistair Pennycook, who is a very specialist scholar in this area. Other people like Robert Phillipson have written about linguistic colonialism. And but again, the theme is very important for us because you see, this morning I chaired a presentation. One lady from City College Dhaka, she was presenting about using Bangla literature in the English language teaching classroom. Okay, so maybe a short story, and then students could talk about it. So that's one way of decolonization, maybe. The new form of colonialism, like AI colonialism, we are having now. Okay, but again, you see, scholars around the world have discussed it. For example, Adrian Holiday, in his appropriate methodology in the social context, has talked about that the methodologies developed in the Western world may not be rightly applicable in our places. And he has talked about, also Kumara Vadivelu has been talking about, you see, culturally sensitive and contextually appropriate methodology and materials. And last of all, we can think about Ngugi wa Thiong'o's famous book, Decolonizing the Mind. That's where it should start. Thank you.
Thank you, esteemed speakers. And so before we end, I would request our esteemed guests and Shaila Ahmed Madam as well to stay on the stage just for a little bit. And I would also request our registrar, Dr. Jahidul Islam Khansar, Muhammad Jahidul Islam Khansar, to join us on stage for a moment of appreciation. Sir, if you can make it. Thank you for your patience. Okay. So first, a small token of appreciation for Dr. Shaila Sultana. I believe Shaila Ahmed Madam can actually hand it over to her, which would be a really nice moment for us to share and cherish. We also have a token of appreciation for our esteemed chair of the session, Professor Hamidur Rahman sir. And I would request our registrar sir to hand it over to him.
One last point I would like to mention to Shaila. When the BRAC started, they followed Freire's ideas and they published books and materials for motivating poor people in the rural areas how to get out of poverty. I don't, does it still exist? Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Shaila Sultana, for that enthralling keynote, and thank you, the session chair. We will now move on to our next session, so I would request our guests to please descend and take their respective chairs. Thank you again. I request the volunteers to please come to the stage and set up the chairs. For our next plenary session, we are going to start shortly. I would request the audience to stay with us. This is going to be a very engaging session. Is it this one? Folderটা ম্যাডাম ডিলিট করে দিয়েছে।
হ্যাঁ আমার প্রেজেন্টেশনটা can I delete it because এখন তো রিভিউ প্রসেসে আছে কোথা থেকে চললো বুঝলাম না
এটা আপনার পেন ড্রাইভ থেকে ডিজিটাল পেন ড্রাইভ
না
না
না ওরা নিয়ে নিয়েছিল আচ্ছা তাহলে
এটা তো পেন ড্রাইভ এটা আমি আপনার ইয়েটা আনছিলাম পাওয়ার পয়েন্টটা এখান থেকে আছে মনে আমি দেখি
এই যেটা
Dear audience, thank you for your patience. We are still arranging the stage for the next segment.